Welcome to this explainer. Today we're cracking open the file on one of the absolute most baffling cold cases of the entire 20th century. This is a story where unimaginable wealth collides head-on with the unforgiving reality of nature. A timeline that suddenly just goes completely dark, leaving behind a trail of questions that, honestly, have never been fully answered.
It's a truly chilling paradox that we're going to investigate today. How does someone with immense wealth, global connections, and unprecedented power simply disappear off the face of the earth? I mean, when we lay out the victimology of missing persons cases, we rarely start with the heir to an American dynasty, right? But in November of 1961, a 23-year-old man with literally all the resources of the Rockefeller family behind him vanished without a trace. To wrap our heads around how a mystery of this magnitude even unfolds, we have to look at the stark contrast between his incredibly privileged life and the raw, untamed vulnerability of the jungle.
Part 1. The Vanishing Heir. Let's pull up the dossier and see exactly what brought him to the other side of the world in the first place.
So, Michael Rockefeller wasn't just some wealthy tourist out on a joyride. In 1961, he was in Dutch New Guinea, an area that's now part of Indonesia, on a highly focused expedition. Yes, he was the son of Nelson Rockefeller, the governor of New York at the time, but Michael was really out there trying to carve out his own legacy. He was actively collecting indigenous art for New York's Museum of Primitive Art. We're talking about gritty, hands-on fieldwork. He was working alongside a Dutch anthropologist named René Wassing, navigating these super remote waters, interacting with local communities, and operating, well, about as far away from the comforts of New York high society as you can possibly get.
But expeditions like this come with immense risks. Let's move into Part 2, the fatal decision, and examine the timeline that ultimately sealed his fate.
Let's walk through his last known whereabouts exactly, like investigators building a timeline. Okay, so it's November 17, 1961. Michael and René Wassing are traveling in a small catamaran-style boat. They're in rough seas, roughly 10 to 15 miles from the southern coast, when disaster strikes. The boat capsizes. For hours, these two men desperately cling to the overturned hull, waiting for a rescue that simply isn't coming fast enough. Believing the boat is drifting further out to sea, Michael makes a fateful, incredibly desperate choice. He ties 2 empty gasoline cans to his body for flotation, tells Wassing he actually thinks he can make it, and starts swimming for that distant shoreline. Roughly 22 hours later, Wassing is spotted and rescued. But from the exact second Michael swam away from that overturned boat, he was never seen by a verified witness ever again.
Part 3. A massive search effort. With a prominent American suddenly missing in such remote waters, the immediate aftermath triggered an absolutely unprecedented response.
This definitely wasn't your standard missing boat search. The Rockefeller family poured their vast private resources into the hunt, creating this incredible true crime contrast, the most powerful family in America going head-to-head with an untamable environment. Because of exactly who Michael was, this became one of the largest search efforts in the region's entire history. Dutch colonial authorities mobilized immediately. We were talking fleets of aircraft, boats, and just weeks of meticulous coastal searches. It drew a massive international media frenzy, too. Even Governor Nelson Rockefeller himself actually flew out to the region to personally oversee the hunt for his son. The pressure on investigators to find answers here was absolutely intense.
But the crucial point to remember is this number right here, 0. Despite a literal army of searchers, aircraft scanning the waters, and boats practically combing the coastline, 0 confirmed physical evidence was ever found. No body, no shreds of clothing, not even those 2 empty gasoline cans he tied to himself for flotation. Just absolutely nothing. Because of this total absence of evidence, authorities officially called off the search and concluded that he simply drowned during that grueling swim.
Part 4. 3 competing theories. Let's step into the shoes of the detectives, weigh the evidence, and examine the possibilities. So just like detectives narrowing down the scenarios, we have 3 primary explanations that have really surfaced over the last 6 decades. Theory 1 is that he simply drowned at sea before ever reaching land. Theory 2 is a much darker investigative angle, that he actually survived the swim, reached the shore, and encountered a specific local Asmat village. And then Theory 3 is that he reached shore safely and just quietly integrated into a local community. Now look, while that third theory of local integration makes for a super interesting Hollywood movie, it's largely speculative. It's not seriously supported by mainstream researchers or the Rockefeller family. So the real investigation here completely hinges on the first 2. Let's contrast that official conclusion of a tragic accident against the much darker, heavily investigated allegation of a potential homicide. Theory 1 is definitely the most widely accepted by authorities.
I mean a 10 to 15-mile swim in rough waters with known strong currents and marine hazards. That is incredibly dangerous, and exhaustion likely overtook him. It makes sense. But theory 2 is where investigative journalists have spent literal decades digging. This theory posits that he somehow successfully navigated that treacherous swim, dragged himself onto the shoreline completely exhausted, and then encountered a specific local village. But you might be wondering, why would this encounter have been fatal?
To understand Theory 2, we absolutely have to look at the historical context, because that acts as the ultimate catalyst in this crime story. You see, this wasn't just some peaceful beach he washed up on. It was a complete powder keg. Researchers and journalists have pointed out that a specific Asmat village in that exact area had very recently experienced a violent, highly traumatic conflict with Dutch colonial police. Basically, the region was a volatile post-conflict zone, and because of this recent trauma, researchers suggest this immense tension may have provided a fatal motive, making an encounter with any white male outsider, especially one who just suddenly appears out of the ocean, incredibly dangerous at that exact moment. It was a tragic, almost unbelievable convergence of timing, location, and historical tension.
However, in the world of true crime, we know that a plausible theory is not a proven fact, and it is so vital to remember this quote. Despite decades of journalistic investigations into complex local cultural practices, and honestly, despite numerous books and articles claiming they finally solved the case through local rumors, these accounts remain entirely uncorroborated by physical proof. There are no remains, no artifacts, and zero definitive legal conclusions. It is, to this day, purely an allegation. We always have to be careful to separate confirmed timeline facts from highly debated, unproven theories.
So where does that leave the investigation today? Part 5, an enduring unsolved mystery.
The reality of this case is just stunning. More than 60 years later, this remains a completely cold case. The absolute truth is still utterly unknown. No body has ever been recovered. There is zero physical evidence to finally tip the scales toward a tragic drowning at sea or toward a fatal encounter on the shore. It's just suspended perfectly between an ordinary tragedy and a much darker, completely unproven possibility. And you know, it proves ultimately that all the wealth, power, and political influence in the entire world still couldn't buy an answer to what happened that day in 1961.
Based on the case file we've explored in this explainer today, I want to leave you with this question to really deliberate on. Looking at the timeline, the insanely rough seas, the grueling distance, and those intense historical tensions on the shoreline, did Michael Rockefeller tragically drown at sea, or did he somehow summon the strength to make it to the shore only to meet a far more complicated fate? What do you believe actually happened? Thank you so much for exploring this cold case with me, and keep investigating the unknown.